space. And we have, of course, panelists, Regine and Asari, who will be introduced later on. We're happy to have you on board. Regine, you can say hello to the participants that have just joined us.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah, good to see you, Regine. Asari, how is
Very
Ghana?
good.
Good to see you, my brother.
Yes, good to see you too. Thank you so much.
Yes, so we'll be dissecting this topic shortly. But before that, let's allow Ivan to come in and introduce the panelists in a better way and also tell us who they are. And then we'll allow them also to give us the opening remarks with the president of APRA.
Welcome everyone once again to the third PR Fundi Masterclass this year. It has been a journey and it's going to be a journey. We thank our partners, APRA, for coming on board and for creating this kind of mentorship that is online. But we know that even us in Uganda, we are learning from South Africa, from Ghana. Last time we had people from Kenya, from Nigeria, and the challenges are not really very different, but you have a different insight every time you share. So today we have two panelists, and we shall have now one from South Africa and one from Ghana. We have Regine Lerox. I hope I got the name. Regine, okay. She's a corporate reputation specialist, and she's the founder of Reputation Matters in South Africa, and she has 19 years of research experience at Reputation Matters that she founded. She has created a tool for measuring organization reputation called Redometer. She's passionate about sustainability, and she has been involved with co-creating eco bags, a hub for creating eco bags in South Africa. And we are happy to have her today. We believe that this experience is enough to point us to how we can shape our respective challenges regarding organization culture in our internal communication plans all over Africa. The second panelist is Osari Anti from Ghana. He's a lecturer in the Department of Strategic Communication at the University of Education, Winneba, Ghana, and is a member of the Institute of Public Relations, Ghana. We are happy to welcome a person who will give us an insight into the academic world, because you know that in our practice, there's a lot to do regarding theory and actual practice. So there is connection. You can't just say you're doing this tactic. Now there has to be a theory. There must be an understanding why you're executing such a plan for staff. So welcome our panelists. The panel discussion will be moderated by Ian Rumanika, our MD at Node Group and PR Fundi, but he also works as the head of external affairs at Uganda Party. Welcome everyone once again. I will hand over to Ian to proceed.
Okay, thank you, Ivan, for those, I think, wonderful introductions. And of course, I would not add anything on the introductions of the bios. They will be able to give us more details as we go on. But on the call, we also are happy to have the President, APRA, His Excellency Arik Karan. If you don't mind, sir, Your Excellency, you can say hello to the participants.
Thank you so much, Ndugu Ian. A very warm good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you are listening, watching us from. My name is Arik Karani. I happen to lead the Africa Public Relations Association and the Public Relations Society of Kenya as both presidents of each association. I think for me, this partnership and what we are doing today, discussing strategic communication in terms of internal communication, is very critical to us. And to me personally, because I think communication is now transcending borders. And it's important for us to learn from each other and to understand what makes it better. When Ian told me about the session topic today, I was very excited because at the end of the day, our employees, our board of directors are some of our critical stakeholders. And most times we end up forgetting them. And how do we rectify this situation? I always say it's important for the right arm to know what the left arm is doing. Then that way the body is coordinated in the efforts of moving forward. But I also say one thing, which is what I want us to take away from the presentation that both Regine and Asare will take us through, is empathy in our communication. Empathy when you're dealing with internal communication is critical because it ensures that the right people get the right information in the right way. Empathy also makes sure that no employee feels left out of what you're talking about. And it's so important for us, especially in times of crisis, in times of giving regular updates on company policies, in times of information overload and simplifying it. It's very important. And do you know what this all does? It builds onto a series that Regine and I do annually, and that is the trust, in terms of it builds a sense of understanding and a sense of trust in your internal stakeholders. That is, for me, critical. And I'm super excited that I can see my very good friends from Kenya, led by Mildred Mugambi, and Tanzania, Austin Makani. And I just implore us to always attend on these monthly sessions because you will get to learn something new every month that is not scripted and that is just pure life details of how you can perfect yourself. I will stop here and I will apologize to the East Africans for the cold weather winter that has come 3 months early as opposed to coming in June. I promise you it is not Kenya's doing. I think it's just a climatic situation. That said, I return back the meeting to my amazing brother, Ndugu Ian. Back to you.
Thank you, Mr. President, for those wonderful remarks and for sharing your pointers that, of course, direct us on the right path, I think, to discuss this particular topic on internal communication. So, ladies and gentlemen, His Excellency, the President of APRA, in support, of course, for these classes through, we've been having monthly classes fully supported and sponsored by APRA, and we continue to have them free classes for all PR professionals across board. And as he said, we have the amazing Asari from Ghana, and of course Regine from South Africa to help us dissect this topic. And this topic today, we're discussing internal communications in PR. Most of the times we focus on external comms, but now we want to see how is it important to our profession? How does it shape organization culture? They say that internal comms is the backbone of internal communications. How is it true? Is it an effort that we need to probably put focus on, or is there some issues of budget? All that we'll be able to see, but how strategically can we organize ourselves to make sure that employees of of our organizations become our first audience before you communicate externally, become our brand ambassadors. And if they aren't aligned to the organizational vision, how does it affect external communications? Today I had a discussions with my head marketing, who was telling me they have a campaign they're organizing. And we discussed and said, how about the internal communications campaign? Are you going to go externally and we do an external campaign and we do not have internal communications or about this campaign? So most of the times we forget about our number one ambassador, who is the staff, and how is this helpful in creating or shaping the culture of transparency, of trust within the institution, and of course engagement, and how does that improve organizational reputation in the long run. So yes, without a doubt, getting internal communications right is a clear challenge to all of us as brands and as PR professionals, especially in a wake of hybrid working. These days, people are at home, they're working from home, or sometimes they have hybrid model of working. COVID crisis was a wake-up call to all of us that internal comms is critical. How do you make sure that you keep abreast of what people are doing, and how does this shape our values as an institution? But these hurdles shouldn't be viewed, of course, as one-offs. We're here to discuss and share experiences from some of these panelists to tell us how do they manage, and how do we make sure that we have clear strategic frameworks that help us in our day-to-day communications. So I'll start with Asari just to tell us, how do you understand about, what do you understand about this topic, and what is your view before we discuss the questions that we have for you? Okay. And then I'll ask Regine to do the same.
All right. Okay, so thank you, Anne. A very good afternoon, evening, and morning to all of us who have tuned in. We are excited that you've joined us this day. I also want to thank PR Funding Masterclass for the invitation. And I also send greetings to my colleague panelist, Regine Leroux. Okay. So as rightly said, we are looking at strategic internal communications for PR professionals. So starting from the back, the professional is that individual, in our case, the PR professional, that is vested with the right of handling communications within the organization. The individual employs some art and scientific methods to ensure that within the organization, communication plays a key role that it should. So when you look at that and then you start from the beginning and you say strategic internal comms, then basically this evening through the next hour or two, we want to say that between the organization, then the individuals who work in the organization, those of us who have the power, the management, should be clear enough to tell our employees that where is the organization going and what role do we as the employees have in fulfilling that role for us. And that brings the strategic component where leadership takes the key role, tells the employees through the professional that this is the vision for our organization and this is the role that we want you, the employee, to play in helping us shape or fulfill that role. So basically, I'm looking forward to, contributions from colleagues, and then we'll enjoy the session. Thank you again.
Thank you, Asari, for that beautiful intro to the topic. Regine?
Thank you so much, and good evening, everyone. And I want to say all protocols observed, just to make sure that everybody is greeted well and in the right way as well. And thank you for the opportunity to be part of the conversation, and to all the wonderful entities that's part of this evening session. I think it's going to be a really dynamic chat. I think one of the key things, having been in the reputation space for the odd 20 years, which is absolutely crazy, is just really reiterating and realizing your employees are your most important asset when it comes to a reputation, because they are your voice when you are not there. So when you see your friends and family over the weekend, after hours, how you really feel about your business, that is what's being communicated
Yes.
at the meal tables, at the functions, over a glass of wine or juice or coffee. That's the real reputation. And we need to make sure that we actually share those values of an organization, that we have the right team doing the right work in the right way, that speak passionately, that are just so brought into what the organization stands for. And that's the key of what of our roles as communicators are. I think so often it's fobbed off, and huge respect to all the divisions, because every single division within the organization plays a key role. But I think very often it's so easy to give that communication role to the human resources department, which is just as important, but their focus is very different. They don't always, and I'm generalizing very grossly here, but I think communicators, as Arik was saying, that element of empathy, we know how to speak to the stakeholders, what channels to use, what those messages need to be. So that is, it's non-negotiable to work very closely with the HR department. They cannot work in isolation. We can't just have one, we can't just have the other. So I think that's part of the conversation. I'd be quite interested also to find out is, to what extent is internal communication being used? Because also, just as a final thought, being in the research space, we do research, quantify reputations. I'm flabbergasted as how often we've seen, and in you were saying it as well, we do research, or you have a function, and I remember clearly I had a conversation with the CEO a couple of years back, planning their research. It was a massive survey that they wanted to understand what the perceptions are, what their reputation score is. And I said, okay, so what's the best way to speak to employees? And you could just see, like, the cogs were turning. It's like, what do you mean employees? Sure, the employees are fine. We don't have to worry about the employees. And actually, I had this conversation more than once with more than one CEO, thinking that this employees are okay, but they're not necessarily okay. And it is such a crucial stakeholder group that we have to prioritize before anything else to make sure that we get that message out there. So that's part of what I'm actually really looking forward to, is to getting more insight from everybody on this beautiful continent of ours, of sharing what are those challenges and how can we bridge the gaps.
Awesome. Awesome. I like the fact that you said, thank you, Regine, that internal comms can no longer be an isolated case. In some organizations, of course, you'll find internal comms sitting in the human resource department. I don't know if you face such scenarios. And of course, as we continue to make sure that we are relevant as PR professionals, how do we strategically position ourselves? We had an argument, I think, 6 months ago, also with the Parliament of Uganda. And I think their internal comms is actually sitting in the human resource division. And it is something that was not sitting well with me. And I was like, how would you allow internal comms to be taken up by the human resource division? And yet, this strategically, you would probably work hand in hand with the human resource division so that you shape a clear narrative and probably help you deliver communications that are consistent but are value-driven on the point of professionalism in terms of communications. But speaking of that, Asari, how has this role of internal communications evolved in our space of PR over the years, especially in Africa, but more so after COVID? Or you can also throw us back before and then after COVID.
Yeah. I think, first of all, our profession itself,
Yes.
the public relations, which one of the functions will therefore be internal communications, has suffered a lot over the period. Initially it was just the messenger sort of job, the protocol aspect, forgetting the actual use of the artistic and scientific approaches to deliver the comms that allows the organization to effectively undertake its goals. So with that alone, internal comms subsumed under our function already was literally non-existent. Oh, okay, we'll do something. We're talking to our externals who are employees. We don't need them. We pay them, they do what they have to do, and that is that.
Yeah.
So we've now moved where there's that deliberate effort now, because we realize that, like Regis said, this employee public group is our number one ambassador. They are the people who use their mental efforts, physical efforts to produce the goods and services that make our organizations thrive. And so it's very important that that role, that opportunity, that interaction is actually concentrated on them, giving them that empowerment, that engagement, and then from there they move and then continue to sell us.
Yeah.
So from the era where we were nobodies, as it were, to an era where there's a clear recognition of the role that we play. And now, because of the specializations, because the aspect of communication that relates to society, they'll say community relations, the one that relates to media and handling media relations. So it's now become a very specialized, sophisticated function where you need people who are trained, people who are appreciative of the role, and then employ them to do what they have to do. So in Africa, if I dare say, from place of obscurity to a place of recognition, and now a place where we recognize its impact and its importance. And that is how internal comms has evolved. I was just reading something briefly about the South African, where we have a colleague who has documented research of internal comms over the period. And she gives the post-COVID and then the pre-COVID rather, sorry, and then the post-COVID period. So you realize that because of now flexibility, remote working, it's even taking on a more a serious role, because they are not with you as you used to have the opportunity. They are outside, which other channels are available for you to continue to interact with them and keep them engaged, keep them informed. And so COVID and other issues have really highlighted the unique role of internal communications. Great.
Asare, thank you very much. Regine, building up from of course what Asare has highlighted is critical. I mean, from your experience, how do you think internal communications influences corporate reputation, especially knowing that in some cases this is something that we have not given attention? Do you think we need to ensure that the internal communications and the internal narrative aligns with the external brand image? Is it something that matters? Does it affect our external reputation?
I want to say 1,000%, absolutely. The role of your employees is what your reputation looks like, because that is the internal message is what's being communicated externally. So that's why we need to make sure that we have that cornerstone, that baseline in place, to make sure that everybody is, I want to say, singing from the same hymn sheet. And that's also why induction, when the newest person comes on board, because what you want, the newest person, the newest intern, the person that's been there for the last 50 years, they need to all sound exactly the same. They need to communicate the same message and be aligned. So that's also that onboarding, that induction, when new people come on board, it's such an important component just to make sure that everybody is aligned. And I think one of the things we often see when we do a lot of internal climate surveys in terms of looking at the culture, we look at the communication, it's communicated very well at the beginning of the life cycle of an employee. But then we see people who's been in the organization about 3 to 5 years or even 10 years. It's not communicated as much because, again, it's assumed. And I think that's a big problem. And we all know what assume stands for. We cannot assume things. So it's very, very important that we do have that internal communication. But I think even more important, or where it all starts, is we need to have a very, very clear set of values that we have. I want to say it needs to be ingrained in your DNA, because it's your values that guide your behavior. And it's that consistent behavior that drives your reputation. So if we don't know what the values are, then you're going to be having a massive problem, because it's your values that guide your culture as well, and who you're attracting to be part of your team. So that's what we definitely need to have a look at first and foremost.
Yeah. And speaking of that, Regine, maybe before I go to Asari, so what would you think are the key elements that we should look at as PR professionals, especially in multinational organizations? Because you have organizations that have probably over 20,000 employees. What are the key success factors to make sure that we get it right?
First and foremost, I'm going to sound like a broken record after this, but I think what is absolutely crucial are your values, the key values, governance, to have the right governance structures in place, the way that we do things. That is going to impact your reputation, because the way you do things consistently, so you can do things inconsistently regularly, and that's going to impact your reputation. But I think what also, as part of that governance, as part of the values, which is a non-negotiable, like your ethics, because that is what also drives you to do the right thing in the right way for everybody that's aligned to the organization. So those three things. But you cannot do that without communication, because it doesn't help to have the most beautiful ethics value statement that's in your annual report. And we actually saw this very recently, last year actually, where we were approached to do a tender, and we were then asked to, we'll give you the tender in exchange for a little bit of a brown envelope. Now, there isn't a little bit of an anything when it comes to anything ethical. So we didn't touch that work at all. But I was quite interested to go and have a look at what the annual report said about ethics. And in there, that was the most beautifully crafted paragraph on how everybody is assigned to ethics. But you cannot just have it written down. It cannot just be something that's a poster or on your website. It has to be reflected in your behavior. And it's through your behavior, how it's communicated, that's where that starts, with your values and your governance and ethics. All the other things fall into place. I think when we look at internal climates, we do have to look at the remuneration. We do look at the responsibility and accountability and all of those good things, which are just as important. But I think if we don't have those initial building blocks in place, then it's all going to crumble and go to pieces.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Regine. So, Asari, building up from what Regine just discussed, especially strategically, and your experience, what do you think are the prominent challenges organizations are facing in making sure that they have the right framework, the right policies in internal communications, the right strategies? Of course, I've seen most PR professionals say that most of the times they are stretched for external comms, so they wouldn't want to put in terms of prioritization, put more effort on internal comms when they are stretched externally. Do you think this is something that is not resourced well? What could be the challenges that we are not doing well in internal comms, but we find ourselves doing better in external comms? Is it a resource issue? Is it a boardroom discussion that we need to have to make sure that we understand how important internal comms and how it's aligned to strategic growth of the institution?
Okay, so let me build up from where Regine left off in terms of how we can position ourselves firstly, and then we'll look at a few of the challenges. So there's a line from Satel 2019, where he talks about the PR professional when it comes to internal communications.
Yes.
And he says, our task is to convince employees that
Yes.
management is desirous of communicating with them and doing this in a truthful, frank, and direct manner.
Yes.
So, first of all, like you rightly said, the culture that will be built for internal communications to thrive is dependent on us, the PR professional.
Mm.
And you must have those core values, as she rightly said, and let those values seep through you through to the organization. When they see you are the individual who's interfacing between management and them, and they see that truly management wants to speak to us, management wants to deal with us as equal partners, you realize that then the internal communications flows, and then everybody really feels part of the family. And then Setel talks about some principles that he believes would help in internal communications. And he talks about respect. So the idea that leadership, the entire organization, respects the employee. You see the way we respect our customers and the customer service charter and what have you. What about the internal? A lot of the time we brush it over it. So you, the PR professional, must instill in management and tell them, look, we respect customers, respect our tax authorities, respect the bankers. Look at the way we have red carpets for them, but the employee, they come and then they go. There must be that respect. Then the honest feedback. There are days you need to tell them as it is. And we need to encourage that. If not, we're wishy-washy. When it's good, we want to make fanfare out of it. When it's bad, we want to shroud it in secrecy. No, we need to have that principle that honest feedback is something that people like. And I was just reading where he talked about the film A Few Good Men, where Jack Nicholson talks about you can't handle the truth. You'll be surprised. The employees are with you. They know what is going on. So they can handle the truth. And we need to be honest with them about that. Then they need to recognize them as equals, as it were. Of course, in terms of ranks, the designations are all there. But equal in the sense that together we are building the organization and this is where we want to go. So if this is where we want to go, I want to hold your hand and move with you. And then also make sure that there is consistent engagement at all times, whether it's through the fora, it's through the newsletter, it's through the management walkabout, even through the opportunity for you just to enter management office and then just share your ideas. These are some principles that will help in terms of the internal comms. Then, like you said, what happens then for us a professional that challenges us? Clearly, if management is not ready to run the organization in that sort of open, clear space, you clearly won't have the opportunity to also be open and transparent because they've made it clear this is not what we want people to know. This is not what we want our employees to know. There's that sort of climate which says that information engagement is a no-no for us. They are just there, they pick their check, we pay them, and we go. There is the need to ensure that leadership takes that role open and clear. And if you recall, those days when Ivy Lee talked about the Declaration of Principles, Ivy Lee made it clear that, look, we are not a secret society. Our business is public, it's open. So leaders must make sure that the organizations have that open culture where honesty, feedback, and consistent engagement is there. So a lot of the time, the main challenge will stem from leadership. And then, of course, as Regine said, remuneration, lack of tools and what have you. But leadership is key in creating that climate for internal comms to thrive. Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you. And do you think leaders are putting unnecessary pressure on PR professionals?
Oh, yes, please. I mean, clearly they have the agenda because if there are certain things they want to shroud in secret, keep away from the employee, invariably, when you step over and then disclose it, engage them, they're like, what happened? This is not in the script. Which script are you reading? And then it becomes a whole issue. But like she said, if we are together, we read the same script, sing the same song sheet, there wouldn't be a problem. And leaders, the organizational owners, the shareholders, the management have to create that culture for us. If not, there's always some friction here and there.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think you have clearly defined what strategic comms, internal comms is, and building from what you've just said, Regine here built a tool called Rapidometer. Is that right, Regine? From your profile, I saw you built a tool called Rapidometer.
That's right. Yeah.
So the question is, what's that? First of all, what does it mean? And what does it do? And how can we, as PR professionals, use similar tools to assess our internal communications effort and, of course, measure our success? You just said that we need to empower ourselves as employees to be brand advocates. But how do we measure this advocacy?
Thank you for that. I think so. The Rapidometer, it's play on words with the odometer on in your car, speedometer. But one of the things that when I started my journey within the communication public relations space, I realized quite early on that unfortunately PR hasn't always PR'd itself particularly well, that it wasn't very strategic. I think we've moved on quite a bit, but I think that there is still quite a bit of work that needs to be done.
Yeah.
But I think when it comes to corporate communication,
some people, Regine, call us chairlifters.
It's absolutely bunnies and balloons and G&T girls. I just absolutely, I get horrified by that, because part of it was that it's just, I also want to just link to what Asari said earlier, and your question to him is, very often we do not have a voice around the boardroom table, but we're called upon when there's a crisis. So more and more CEOs and leaders are seeing the value of PR, but mainly when there's a crisis, when it's slightly too late. So that was also one of the things that I wanted to do with this Rapidometer, this reputation tool, is to quantify our value. Because I think one of the key things is, how do we really prove what we are doing as communicators? I think we often have to fall back onto something called the Advertising Value Estimate, AVEs, which is very much a marketing thing. And I just thought, you know what, why do we have to rely on marketing when we are the whole communication for an organization? So we've looked at 10 different things that builds a reputation for organization: your leadership, your governance, your values, your employees, who you are working with, your strategic alliances, your communication, the work that you do. So there's a whole methodology around that. But one of the key reasons I wanted to do that is to help communicators to learn how to speak in numbers, to get that seat around the boardroom table, because our CEOs, our CFOs, the people who hold the purse strings, they don't honestly, and I say this respectfully, they couldn't care less about a press release or an event. They really couldn't they want to know how they're going to get more money for the organization. Now, without having the right communication professional to help you to communicate what we're about, you're going to have a really difficult time to motivate your position within the organization. So if we can speak in numbers and say our reputation is 68% because our employees are not informed because of X, Y, Z, and be able to put those percentages on the table, it really just makes it a lot more powerful to have access to budget, because that's why marketers, I think, often get the budget, because they can say, they have it's a lot easier to quantify what they are doing, because we are working in a realm where it's very much it's not a hard sell. It's in the empathy range. It's very difficult to put a percentage, a number to that. But that's what we've developed, is to be able to say, this is what we are doing from a communications point of view. Our reputation is this percentage. And then you can actually also start seeing and comparing it to a bottom line. Because if you've got a good reputation, people want to be associated with your organization. They are willing to spend their hard-earned money on your brand, on your service, because they want to be associated with it. They resonate with you, right? They resonate with what you do, how you do it. That's where, and that linking it to internal communications, that's where you get your top talent from. Your top talent want to be part of your organization. They want to help grow the organization. You're going to get the top talent, and the more top talent you have, they have the tools, they have the means, the more you're going to be growing. It's just this wonderful win-win scenario with being able to have all of that in place. The same is said, if you don't have a good reputation, it's going to be difficult to attract and keep your top talent. So that's also why that's so key, with a key point here being that element of research. To be able to incorporate research, it doesn't have to be difficult. It doesn't have to be a very long questionnaire at all. But at least that also helps to get that two-way communication going. I know it was mentioned earlier, is to get that feedback. That's so, so important, that it's just not just a one-sided element of it. So I think that's really key, is to also start thinking in realms of research, because I think we often feel we want to not do research because we think it's quite a daunting exercise. So that's also part of seeing how can we make it a lot more accessible to use in the space of communication.
Thank you. Thank you, Regine. And speaking of research, participants, we have something that was developed by Regine here for you to fill in, and we'll be able to see the results at the end. So it's in the chat room, and they say, hello participants, as the class progresses. Kindly respond to this short survey. It will take less than 1 minute. And then as we grab a cup of coffee, please make sure that you respond to that survey quickly. Just check your chat room, respond to that short survey, and then Regine will tell us why at the end of this, towards the end of this particular half session, why we had to fill in that survey. We just need to test something, but there's a survey in the chat room. Please check it out, fill it in, and then we continue the conversation. Just take 1 minute of your time, and it wouldn't take long, and then we continue this conversation. At the end of the conversation, it's a wonderful conversation, I must say, Regine and Asari, that we're having. We'll also open it up to the audience, to the participants, and these peer professionals to tell us their experiences or to ask us some questions that they have. But so far so good. Overall, I've learned that we need to make sure that we do not isolate internal comms to the HR department or marketing to PR teams. We need to collectively, like Regine said, work together to shape the narrative of the institution. But also overall, like Asari said, we would like to see an internal communication strategy or framework that fosters employee engagement. Of course, builds trust, shared understanding within our values, within the goals of the institution, aligns the perspective of the boardroom with the operational teams. And how do we ensure, from the repedometer and everything that we're using, how do we ensure that those tools and that the internal narrative that we are trying to shape is measured properly, but also we know how to improve in terms of the results that we get, and not complicating issues, short surveys, look at the engagements levels, measure that, and then it will inform simple research that will inform your strategies. But how do we continuously, of course, as PR professionals, work hand in hand with other departments to cultivate a positive and cohesive work environment, because then that will build into performance, will build into organizational behavior, will build into the reputation and the values that shape, at the end of the day, the reputation of the institution. So as we continue, please fill in the survey monkey there from the Pira Fundi herself, Regine, and she will tell us more after we fill it in. Please, has everyone seen the survey? Please, the survey is in the chat room. Please look at it. Look at it and tell us if it is speaking to you, and then at the end of this session, we'll look at the results and probably Regine will throw more light. So, Asari, speaking of professionalism.
Yes, please.
How can PR professionals or communicators align internal communication with the overall corporate strategy? Of course, in the interest of enhancing organizational success, because we don't want to be seen as chairlifters. We want to be in the boardroom discussing very important things than running around only to organize press conferences. But we want to make sure that we align everything that we are doing to the overall corporate strategy and plan.
Yes.
So how do you do this?
Okay, so building on from what Regine talked about, research is key. Research is fundamental. In fact, for us as public relations practitioners, we know that before we even write, we even do anything, there must be some sort of research.
Yeah.
So when we have the opportunity to serve as internal comms, one of the first things we can do is to conduct an internal communications audit.
Yeah.
And what happens is that together with management, we sit and then we have this personal in-depth interviews. It could be through a poll, it could be a survey, a questionnaire, but some sort of information must be gathered. And settle means 3 questions. When we are conducting this internal communications audit, he asked that, first of all, we have to ask ourselves, how will internal comms support the mission of the organization? In fact, a lot of the time, sometimes we are so excited, we are the focus that we actually don't focus on what the organization is about. Sometimes we even talk about ourselves more, highlighting more about ourselves, forgetting that at the end of the day, it's the organization that is actually paying you, making you who you are. So it's the organization you need to focus on. And therefore, the research should show how internal comms will support, will lead, will facilitate the entire goal. Then he talks about internal comms having the support of leadership.
Yeah.
As you have a discussion, you can glean from their mood, from what they write, even their response, whether this is somebody or a group that is willing to give the resources, give the support, give the backing to internal comms to actually work and facilitate what we want them to do.
Yeah.
And then the other one is that how responsible will the management meet the concerns and needs of the employees? Because a lot of time there's fanfare. We tell them the suggestion box is there. Oh, the intranet is there. Managers walk around, give me this, give me that. Then it's shelved. Nobody takes control of it. But when we sift that information, we give it to management response. Our colleagues in the office, in the entire organization realize that, wow, these people are really fighting for us. These people are really working for us. And earlier, I had a chance to read this report by Institute of Public Relations, the American Institute, and then they've come out with a study about employee engagement within our industry. And there are a number of nuggets of wisdom that they talk about. One of them they talk about is that if management leadership invests in the professional development of we, the PR professionals, it drives engagement.
Yeah.
The more you feel that your manager believes in you, supports you, gives you access to resources and what have you, you yourself will continue to also work harder and get your colleagues to be what? Engaged. They talk about support in the workplace fosters trust in the organization overall. If you have a workplace culture which is supportive, which gives that openness and honesty, engagement continues to be there. They talked about the idea where organizations, of course, need to improve their listening, because even though we talk about listening from outside, listening also from inside. At the end of the day, it's the employees who say, who speak, and what they say is important, that we take it as feedback and then use that feedback to also, leverage our comms and all that. So the short and of it that research is key, and
Yeah.
research about what our colleagues in the organization want, what our colleagues in the organization need is paramount, and that serves as the bedrock for subsequent internal communications.
Okay. So speaking of that, do you think the boardroom has a role in internal communication?
Oh yes, please. In fact, at the end of the day, the entire goals, the mandate of the organization is vested in the board. The board, we say, provides a strategic leadership, strategic framework for all to go about, whether it's finance, whether it's comms, whether it's operations. So that aspect of communication, if the board gives that sort of consent, that sort of openness, that sort of approval, then clearly internal comms will also flow, and then internal comms will really, really, as it were, demonstrate its uniqueness and its importance to the organization. So the role of leadership, the board, is very, very, very important.
Thank you, Asari. I think without a doubt, we all agree 100%. Once the boardroom supports internal comms, then there will be much that will be achieved within a short while. And speaking of course, messaging, Regine, we always say leaders should be transparent, authentic in their messaging, consistent. So how important is this in terms of this so-called transparency, authenticity? Is it cosmetic authenticity? How important is it to be consistent in our messaging, especially looking at change communications in organizations where we want to build a strong organizational culture? Earlier on, we were discussing how does organizations also integrate sustainability into internal communications, or sustainability messaging into their internal communication strategies. So just tell us how important this is of leaders or internal comms being transparent. The boardroom, yes, is critical. How do we make sure they're authentic in their messaging? It's not something that in the long run we start doubting as employees. How important is it to lead this by example, and also make sure that there's integration of sustainability messaging into our strategies? Sorry, I have just mixed them up, but I know you know what I'm talking about.
That's perfect. It's an absolute non-negotiable. I think what worries me a little bit though is the word authenticity is being thrown around quite a lot these days, because it sounds good. We all want to be authentic, because it's kind of like the buzzword at the moment, I suppose, that and transparency. But it doesn't help if you have the most beautiful crafted values and value statement if you're not going to live by it. If you're not going to, you can't have one persona at home and one persona at work, because that's not going to be authentic. You have we've seen this in the past, and we often see it when people on social media say, and it used to be on Twitter or X now. I tweet to my own capacity, or retweet, or X doesn't mean I endorse it. But the thing is, it actually does, because you can't step away from that. It has to be ingrained in everything that you do. And you say, I think all Rotarians would also know the 4-way test. So you kind of want a 4-way test for your organization of the things that you think, say, and do, that people can rattle off your values regardless of the time of day. And what we do as a team, and I found it very valuable. We went through a big exercise a couple of years back, because I also thought, I think often what happens is your leadership team, they go away on a strategy session, and they come up with these beautiful words, a beautiful strategy. It's a big party. They can't come back, and then they tell the employees what it's about. These are our values. So what's very valuable is if you actually go through an exercise with your team, for them to come up with the values that they can embrace and that they can also live up to. So we went through this whole exercise of coming up with values for our team, and we had a facilitator that helped us. And one of the most powerful things that came from that as well is we've got beautiful values. We help companies to build to be greater, and the GREAT stands for growth, respect, excellence. Authenticity is in there, trust, ethical, and relationships. So that's the acronym is greater, so that we can build greater companies. But the key is we actually have a set Monday meeting with our internal team. We sit all over. We work virtually. We've actually been working virtually since 2008. So we are very happy that people realize it's possible to work from a virtual space. So then it is even more crucial to have conversations regularly with your team. And part of our agenda every single week is what resonated or that didn't resonate with our values in this past week, so that the values are top of mind, so that they can then say, this situation happened, and that also helps us with decision making. When we have questionable people asking us to do work for them or with them, and I often find it quite interesting. I mean, we're not going to veer off what we do. It's in our name. Reputation matters. Yet we get very interesting requests that come our way. But it makes it so much easier to make decisions. And it's then easy for the team in conversations that they have or things that cross their path to make a decision of, yes, we're going to do this, or no, we're not going to do that. There's no question about, oh, but why didn't we decide to do work with XYZ? Because they didn't align with us. Because if you're not aligned with your values internally, then the employees that you attract, but also the customers, the clients that you're going to be attracting, it's going to be a nightmare. It's a nightmare to work with anybody that's not aligned and on the same page as your own values. So it just actually takes away 6 months worth of stress. You're going to stress about it for a little, maybe 2 or 3 minutes, if that long. It's going to be a bit uncomfortable. Rather be uncomfortable for short term than being absolutely hating life for the next 6 months to a year. So that just is so that's also linking to the sustainability side of things. We had a company that did approach us again a number of years back, wanting to do something within the waste management side of things. We started asking very basic questions. And it came across that whatever they wanted to do was being imported from China. And we said, okay, just help me understand, because also because I thought this would be amazing, just from a job creation, just from so many, the waste management, it would have been fantastic. How do you justify your carbon footprint if you're bringing stuff from China? He's like, no, we don't speak about that. Well, I'm like, well, we really do. We can't not speak about these things, because, and again, that would have been a very big misalignment from an authenticity point of view. If we're saying we're very much in the sustainability side of things, we're very much concerned about our environment, we're very much concerned about XYZ, from a growth respect, you are not really respecting us, easy decision. So I think to be very clear in those values, being that driving force, really helps with internal decision making as well. You also mentioned something very important, and just to touch on it, and I don't know if you're going to touch more on it, is that whole aspect of change management as well, is to make sure that you have that key person who is going to be communicating around it. And that's where your leadership, your CEO, plays an absolutely crucial role. You can't, we again, years ago, and I have a lot of these examples just because I can speak on the stuff that I've worked on. These are real life experiences where we had to have a massive change management project that we implemented within it was within an IT project many million years ago. And the leadership was actually delegating that job to other people. And you cannot do that. You have to be seen doing the change first. You have to have those change makers, those champions. I use the word reluctantly because these days they're known as influencers. So we have to have those influencers internally that absolutely embrace and have that message right to be able to make the changes and to get the internal messaging right. So yeah, I can speak on this forever, but I hand back over to you.
Thank you, Regine. And speaking of change agents, sorry, or change ambassadors, yesterday we had floods around Kampala, and it was a huge mess up, especially in here in the industrial area where I sit, where we have a number of manufacturing plants here, there's a lot of drainage issues. And it was all over flooded. And of course, if you visit most of the institutions around here, I mean, that's not something they expected. It was a disaster, it was a crisis. Most of the offices were flooded the whole day. Probably if you ask institutions or you ask CEOs here, they will tell you they lost over maybe $50,000 a day in terms of not producing, because these are manufacturers that produce on a day, on a daily, to make sure that the markets get their products or services. And I don't think most PR professionals of those institutions as well, they are well prepared to deal with the internal crisis. So do you think we have a role to play as communicators? And what role does internal communications play in crisis management? And how should we prepare as PR teams to make sure these scenarios are not reactively handled, they are proactive? We have simulations in place. We have frameworks that would help us make sure that we support management to handle such uncertainties.
Okay. So, let's begin with the aspect of the topic that we discussed, like you said earlier, the strategic internal communications. And we've established that what makes it strategic is that leadership takes absolute control, sets a clear direction, and then the expert, as the PR, is able to interpret it in such a way that is engaging, truthful, and honest to our employee public.
Yeah.
So consistently, management leadership is always giving the narration of where the organization is going, how the organization is performing, what the organization seeks to do. And then they consistently tell you, or through us, the employee public, the PR, to the employee public, what our role is, what they expect of us, how they expect us to behave. So that aspect, when that is clear, all things being equal, we know that with crisis, it is some allegation, some revelation, some event that occurs unexpectedly. And sometimes when it does, how we respond to it honestly, truthfully, and immediately is the difference between it escalating and then it actually being, as it were, a normal issue instead of reactive, but very proactive. So once we consistently know where we are going, what our role is, you realize that the moment the crisis comes, the employee public is more than willing to support, more than willing to offer their perspective and their engagement on the issue. They don't turn aloof. They don't say, aha, we said it was going to happen. We tried to tell you, didn't listen to us. Once those channels have always been there, those opportunities for them to even honestly say, oh, management, we believe that honestly, if we don't take this step, one day something will come and then it will affect all of us. This flood in our country, it also happened just yesterday. The business district floods all over. One of our colleges of education, the electrical wiring, literally, with a tree, just brought it down, and the school was shut down for the whole day. Like you rightly said, if management has always been proactive with the employee, you realize that even their outcry, output, as it were, their concerns for the issue will be so glaring, and people realize that they are actually behind management. They respect and understand why management has to take these decisions. But once management does not give that clear-cut direction, clear-cut, approach, you realize that no, when these things happen, they'll just react, and then it rather gives all sorts of problems. So always that strategic positioning is there. Let management clearly, consistently, daily, weekly, whatever basis, let the employee public know where the organization is going, how the organization is faring, what is happening to the organization. Then through us, the professional, let us know what role you expect of us at each point in time. And you realize that the synergies that will be created will always inure to the organization in the long run.
Very critical to make sure that employees have the right information so that you minimize on the misinformation and of course panic as usual. When there's a crisis, there's panic. So how do you make sure that your internal comm is consistent and you have a framework in place to make sure you prepare your internal employees and they do not panic, and you can navigate through the uncertainty that has just happened. And that's critical. And thank you, Asari. And I hope that we'll discuss this more. But as we discuss strategic internal comms, I think we clearly all agree that leadership has a role to play in ensuring that internal communication strategies work. Once you don't have buy-in from the top, it will be very difficult to shape what we're talking about. So, Regine, how can organizations balance transparency? Of course, you talked about we're throwing around big words, authenticity, transparency. How do we make sure that we've been faced with a lot of leakages of information out there, and also sometimes sensitive information, finding it outside there. And speaking of what Asari here has been discussing, how can organizations balance transparency with confidentiality when handling especially sensitive internal comms?
I think one of the key things is, again, your governance is to have your training in place, basic communication training, but also to have your policies and procedures in place to make it very clear right at the beginning that this is what you can and can't, confidentiality. And I think also what's important from a transparency point of view, this is why this is confidential, because X, Y, Z. But just to also link it to your crisis scenario, and I'm really sorry about all the floods that's happening. I'm thinking of everyone and hope for everyone's safety. With having that crisis plan in place is to make sure that when you're working on your crisis strategy, your crisis plan, is that the first level of stakeholders on there should actually also be your employees, so that they don't hear about the crisis on the radio or television or media. So it's to make sure that an internal memo goes out, but included in that memo is to say, if you do receive any information from journalists, either this is the key message, or revert any questions that you get to the spokesperson, CEO, or whoever, to make it clear. Because we hope that people will do the right thing, but we can't assume that they would. If we need to guide them, our teams, in terms of what to communicate to whom, or the importance of getting that message right, because you don't want just anybody to speak about a crisis that's happened. And I think also that confidentiality, it also links to what you can and can't put onto social media. You can't tell people what to put on there from a personal perspective, but I think it's very important to have those guidelines in place, but then also that accountability. If you don't follow these rules, these are our policies, our procedures, how will you be kept accountable for that? What are the consequences? Because I think very often we don't see the action being taken with consequences per se. So I think that's really important, that it's a clear message that we also send out, and to have the training in place for all of that, even if it's just a high level type of training that needs to happen.
Okay, thank you, Regine. Sorry about that.
All good.
Yeah, it's all good. So, and speaking of that, sorry, maybe you could continue this conversation from what Regine was saying, because there's of course post-COVID now there's a rise of remote work, and we as employees we have the freedom to do our work in the times that we feel we are comfortable with. How can organizations maintain effective communication with the employees that are not on the ground, And also speaking of course, issues that Regine is raising here of confidentiality and sensitive information. You have employees in their workplaces in different locations, and probably you don't have proper control over them. So with this rise of remote work and hybrid work, of course, post-COVID, post this crisis of COVID, how can organizations really maintain effective internal communications and make sure that employees are engaged? Because see, we're in a bunny environment, quality volatile, very uncertain. Employees are doing everything, they're disruptive, they're distracted as well. How can we make sure that these are engaged but are in sync with organization culture?
Yes, please. Okay.
With the
Thank
remote
you.
work.
Yes, please. So, like you rightly said, post-COVID, work in terms of what we knew work to be has greatly changed. And so we have more people working, as it were, remotely and not working within the environment that the normal 9 to 5 hours permitted. So they are outside the workplace. Now, irrespective of where you work, the rules and policies, as Regine talked about, still apply to all of us. However, because of the dynamics of technology and the spaces and geographical locations, we need to update a lot of our policies and ensure that we test them, because sometimes they are there and then we are just, okay, we know they are not working within the 9 to 5 hour period that we normally have. So I can't just query you like that. I can't just put this on your file and then you'll be scared or worried. So the policies are there, irrespective of where you work. They just need to be updated and tweaked to suit the sort of dynamics that we have now. That being said, like I always say, management also needs to continually remind them that they, or yes, the employee public, continue to be the focal group that helps the organization to thrive. So wherever you find yourself in this new change, you are still part of the group. You are still respected. You are still the one we want to work with. You are still the valued. We want to continue to work with you, because when they are far away, they feel distance, they feel left out. And management must continue to engage them based on those new dynamics. So clearly, more emails, intranet, more visits, if it has to be, in terms of actually traveling to where they are and having the engagement with them. Thankfully, we have Zoom now, the Zoom calls, just to let them know that, look, you are still loved and you are still respected. So the policies are still there. We just need to update them, tweak them to reflect the current situations, and then we continue to give them the leadership and then the support that they need so that they give off their best. Yes, please. Yeah.
I need to unmute. Thank you. Thank you very much. Regine, as we come to the end of the first session, and members or participants, I'm going to allow you to ask questions. You can post the questions in the chat room, you'll be able to read them, or you can raise your hand later on and we'll unmute you and then you'll be able to speak. But speaking of employees and employee engagement, Regine, I feel like most of the times employees lack the emotional commitment. Most of the change management or change communications I've done in different institutions is that they see change as if it is something that is animal, that is coming from the top, driven by the boardroom and senior management. How do we create an engagement framework where employees move with us through the emotional journey, and also make sure that, as you said, we need them to be brand advocates, to be brand ambassadors, but most times senior management faces the fact that most of them look at change communications or any change that is happening within the institution as the animal of the leadership. So how do we empower employees to make sure that we move with them on this change curve?
So Ian, I think one of the biggest challenges that we see with change management, and maybe I'd be quite interested to hear if it's other people's challenges as well, but I think every single change management project I've worked on, the communication has happened way too late in the process.
Yeah.
When it's become, they know the changes. I want to say the leadership team knows the change is coming. And motivate. We need to start communicating. We need to start engaging. We need a plan. We need to have a change management strategy. Where is it that we are? Where do we want to go? And how and when are we going to start communicating? But it kind of feels that it's often left. It's not seen as a priority, enough of a priority. The operations side is often what needs to be focused on. Communication is neglected, and then all of a sudden, somebody realizes, oh my goodness, this change is happening next week.
Yeah.
We need to start communicating about it. And that's when it starts feeling that it's top down. Management has said, you must not just implement it. Whereas if that communication process, because people do go through, I want to say like a grieving process when things change. People don't like change.
Yeah.
We all love our comfort zones. And when we go through change, we do go through all of those emotions of denial, of aggression, of ignoring it. And everybody goes through it at different times. But if we can, and this is going back to what Arik was saying, having empathy from a communications point of view, empathy that we are dealing with human beings, especially in a change. We have to implement this change, starting the communication much, much sooner, helping to get that buy-in. So as soon as people start buying into it and realizing they're going to start help to get our message across better, that it's top down, but also bottom up in terms of it. And I think with any communication, regardless of its internal, external change, I'm a very big proponent or believer. There has to be balance in absolutely everything. It can't just all be bottom up. It can't all be top down. It can't just all be internal. It can't all just be external. We have to have balance in absolutely everything that we do. But I also think if we plan properly, then we will see a lot more success with change management. But I'm yet to have that where we actually have enough time. I don't think we ever have enough time to do it. And yes, we can do it short term and we can do it really well, but I think it does more damage sometimes to neglect the communication aspect that could have started much, much sooner, and to make people feel part of the process because it's their company. And I think that's also why they're so protective of comfort zones. This is mine. I'm used to it. This is how I want to continue doing it. I'm not understanding why you want to change if it's working, that we're not necessarily bridging that gap well enough of why we should be changing and addressing. So that's where we need to bring in all the different channels of communication. And I think we haven't touched on it yet, but this is a whole new conversation. I think it's the first time ever that we've had 3-4 generations working in one company, where you have the 18-year-olds and the 68-year-olds, each with very different focuses, very different communication needs and preferences. Although I must admit, with the research that we've done, our baby boomers are more retiring now, coming back as consultants. And again, very grossly generalizing, love face-to-face and telephonic. I'm Gen X, don't phone me. Please send me a WhatsApp or an email. I'm very comfortable with that. Whereas, again, we see our youngest generations, they again loving phone calls, they're loving face-to-face. So it's kind of coming that full circle. But we can't see that. Sorry?
No, that's exactly. I always use the word full circle.
Absolutely, exactly. So, but the thing is, we can't assume. We have to ask the questions. We must make sure that we actually find out what is going to be best for our employees, and that's also part of the discussion we'll have when we go through those results. So
And speaking of the diversification of the workforce that we have. Of course, they say today's workforce, I think most times expect the employers to be more than people who write, paychecks. So we expected to share about their mental and physical well-being. We also expected to make sure that we have a clear standpoint on daily pressing issues that they take to be sensitive, to be political. They want leadership to have those kind of positions that are clear. How do we make sure we don't ignore such concerns, especially knowing that we are working with 3 different generations, Regine? And how critical is it?
Sorry, Ian, do you mind just repeating that for a second? I missed the beginning, but my
sorry.
apologies.
It is well. So you said that we are dealing with a workforce that is diversified, and I agree with you. A workforce of 3 generations working together in the same workspace. Of course, the young ones also are largely putting management on pressure. That's more than the check you're writing. We expect you to be more deliberate and intentional on our mental and physical well-being as your staff and as internal communicators. How do we make sure that we, as organizations that these employees work for, have a clear standpoint in how we are shaping the culture of those institutions on pressing issues like physical well-being, employee mental well-being, to make sure that we have positions that are more sensitive to employees, which they take more important than just sending paychecks at the end of the month.
Absolutely. I think it's such a critical area, and mental well-being, that health and well-being. And we're seeing the younger generation as well, making sure these days they're actually quite critical in terms of the companies they choose to work for. And we're seeing more and more of the younger generation wanting to know, what is it that you stand for? What is it? How are you actually contributing to society? And they are the ones that want to, that it's a two-way street. As much as you're the employer doing the application and the interview, you're also being interviewed. And I think it's a good thing, where it's important to also, and as I mentioned earlier, that balance in terms of, as you say, it's not just a paycheck, it's the balance in life. It's what are those added benefits that you would get as an employee to keep you there. But it is a given. There has to be that balance. To be able to. I want to also say have that flexibility to have that, because as you were saying earlier, with having that hybrid system of working remotely, you have to have that trust and that mutual respect. You can't have that if we don't have the key values again. And it comes back to those key values in place that you need to communicate. You need to be very clear in terms of, these are our values, this is what it means, and this is what you're signing up to. So you can't be unhappy about your work scenario, knowing very clearly that this is what it's about. And so clear communication, values, and balance.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Regine. And maybe as we move into now the question time, members, please send in your questions through the chat room. I'll be able to read them. So I wanted to ask Asari, as maybe we'll also give Regine a chance now to present the results of the survey and take us through those results. As Regine prepares that, what trends do you foresee, Asari, shaping the future of internal comms? You're a doctor in this, in communications, and the animal in the room now, of course, is AI. How is AI also transforming internal communications? How do we leverage on it? How do we leverage on digital? What platforms do you think we could use and leverage on to make sure that we have effective internal communication. But just shape in a few minutes, just shape a picture on how do you see the future of internal comms in
Okay,
the PR profession.
Yeah, so just to continue from where you and then Reggie talked about the generational divide in the workplace space. Of course, like you rightly said, we now have 3 generations working together in one space. And so the atypical employee public that we had those days is clearly not the same. And the idea that you, the PR professional, has to now really take your time and understand them clearly and know how each of them has to be communicated is very important. And so just to rehash the idea that this generational divide is going to take an even more nuanced approach from us as PR professionals in how we engage them. Then also, because of that, we have to now balance corporate activism with the individual activism, like you said. Those days with the Settle talks about your cradle to grave development. You come, you work, you do, and then you are off. You come, you work. But now people are more concerned about their mental well-being. They're concerned about leisure pursuits. They're concerned about even how you recognize them in terms of their sexuality and what they can say, their religious views. They are more pronounced about that. So while the organization is also trying to defend itself and respond to certain issues, the individual in the workplace is so articulate and lets everybody know where he or she stands on certain issues. So as an internal communicator, how do you balance, or how will you balance both the corporate activism interests of the organization and then the individuals who are in your organization who also believe that, look, we also want to be heard, we also want to be known, we also want to be felt. So that aspect is something that in the future, or I mean present as of course, we as internal communicators should really look out for. Then the idea of technology. In fact, technology and moving to AI has changed literally everything that we do. Mind you, those days when the information is just between you and management, now everybody has a copy of the annual report. So when they disclose something and they say it's not true, you just take a snapshot, bam, it's on the internet, and managers like, oh dear, what do we do now? So we need to critically look at the tools that we are using, how we enable our colleagues to use, and go back to the policies and procedures. You can't do this even if you have the power to, because of this, and that. You have access to a smartphone, you have access to a recording device. So you sit in a meeting, you take some very deep issues, and then you place them on Signal or on Telegram because you feel you are an activist. No, there are still policies, there are still programs that guide us. Because first of all, as an employee, you are subject to your organization's rules, with your policies and programs. So the challenges facing us as internal communicators, I see the generational divide, I see the workplace dynamics change, I see, of course, technology, and then I rightly said also the idea that even in terms of opportunities where other colleagues from other management operations would also want to have a feel of getting that access to management as we have, we'll see it coming now, because very soon the accountants, the legal officers, they also find a way of trying to, as it were, get the ear of management, and they're like, oh, what about us? What about us? What about us? Ours is not to worry, just continue to understand that at the end of the day, we have the skills and tools that allows management to interpret what they want to say. And that communication is what we will use to facilitate all that needs to be done. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Asare. Regine, over to you as we come to the last segment of the class, which is going to be a Q&A session. Just take us through briefly on what the survey said.
Perfect.
I don't know if you would just speak over it, or you can share now. Are you in position to share?
I'm not sure if I can share it. I'm just quickly going to send it. I've just finished it. So just bear with me 1 second. So just for our guests, that our attendees that are here, we decided that we wanted to also make you work a little bit in terms of giving us your feedback when it comes to communication and your experiences. So we thought it might be interesting also just to get your insights. So I'm just quickly trying to share this presentation. So just bear with me 1 second as I share it. I'm hoping this is the right thing. Bear with me a second. And I think also part of what we wanted to do with this survey is to show that it's really quick and easy to do a survey with your teams, to do it internally. It doesn't have to be long.
Yeah.
And having very specific questions that you can ask your employees. But we just thought that this would be a little bit of fun for you also, just to see what other attendees deal with, or what's happening out there. So I have just from our side quickly shared it on the WhatsApp group, so I'm hoping it's come through.
Okay, so you're sharing in the chat room?
I did. So if someone from your team can just share it on the screen, please.
Anthony, could you be able to share it? Maybe you can share it with Anthony on WhatsApp.
Yeah, I did do that.
Yeah, so as that is being shared, so let's allow people to ask. If you have a question, please you can raise your hand and we'll be able to unmute you and you say something. Or if you have a question, you can also post it in the chat room.
I think
Austin, yes, Regine.
While you're waiting for people to ask questions, which they will do very shortly, I'm sure you're going to get lots. I just wanted to add to just kind of link to what you were asking Asari earlier with, what's the future of internal comms look like? And I think one of the key things is data-driven decisions, to be able to use data to make decisions, to get that two-way feedback. Because we always know we need feedback, but we don't always know how to do it. But I think it doesn't have to be a complicated thing. So just to add to one of those things from where we should be heading to.
Thank you. So if you want to ask questions, please raise your hand. I will be able to unmute you and you ask that question. So Austin, I see something. And also, I don't know, this person is iPhone, the person called iPhone. He says, the discussion has reminded me of the time I was asked to include a section on rumor mongering in the organizational communication policy. Really? I suggest that instead of doing that, we could strengthen internal comms, and then there wouldn't be the need for rumor mongering or misinformation. Okay. So then, of course, Austin, I think you have something that you're asking. Communication globally is transforming by the minute, and while platforms used to be simple and straightforward in the recent past, trends have redefined communications from digital media, use of AI, and more of that. And how then do we ensure, maybe I'll ask the Professor Asedi, how then do we ensure authenticity, emotional intelligence, and integrity remain of high value and standards amidst these evolutions? So Asari, you will answer that shortly. And then we have Romana Malukusema. Thank you. I'm not sure I have a direct answer for now, but as much as we have all the technology and all coming up, I think there are things such as authenticity that can never be 100% mimicked. Communicating from earlier on the values and culture to all employees will help. I think this is a question you're trying to answer, my friend,
Yeah.
posting.
Yeah.
And probably we'll also look at that. So the other question is from Juliet, and these will quickly answer them. Which department is ideal for internal communications team to be placed? Marketing, PR, and HR. Regine, quickly, marketing, PR, and HR.
I think it's for communication under public relations, but there should perhaps be a representative from HR and marketing so that everybody can work together. I don't think it should work in isolation.
Yeah, so it's in communications, PR, but then you could work hand in hand with marketing. Marketing may have an external campaign, but you need to support them in making sure there's an internal campaign first before it goes out. Human resource may have a cultural campaign or mindset change or behavioral campaign, or they want to make sure they create awareness of their policies. So you collaborate with them, and the HR manual is probably, shared in a consistent and also fun way. As a PR professional, you can create a campaign around that. How many members should be part of the internal communications team, and what professional backgrounds should they have? Sorry.
Wow, members. It depends on how the organization structures itself, but because we always say utilize one spokesperson when communicating, the office itself, we have the boss who always is the go-to person speaking, but you can have some assistants, 2, 3, who help gather the information, put the papers together, and then give to the top management. So as a 3-member team, I don't want to give a fast rule, but the idea is that it's always one person who will speak at the end of the day, and then give the information through to management. But the numbers, I don't know. Reggie, what do you think of that?
It is tricky to put a number to it, to be quite honest. I've seen massive HR teams that do the communication, and I've seen massive communications teams, but I think it depends on the size of the organization, the channels of communication. Ideally, I've actually seen more often than not under-resource of the communications team, who that has to look after digital, print, writing, website, newsletters, so many channels. So ideally, to have somebody that's responsible for all the different, to identify which are the core channels, and then to delegate that accordingly. So it is again important to work with the different departments. But yeah, I think as much as communicators are able to do miracles with the amount of work that needs to be done, often with the amount of resources available. So I think, there's no hard and fast number what would be ideal. I think it's also making sure that you maximize everybody's time, because you also want to have people just doing nothing.
Yeah, I think, Julie, my take on this one is I've seen teams of 50 or plus being ineffective, especially and I've seen teams of 3 or 2. I mean, you find a communication team that is of a 3-man team, and they are very effective just because they have proper framework, proper policies in place, proper internal communication plans in place. So I think it's not an issue of numbers, really. It's an issue of how you strategically organize to engage your audiences. And that is something that we could discuss until the cows come home. Regine, yes.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, Ian. And just before we go on to the next one, I think what's very, very important is to have very clear role descriptions of what is required of that specific person in the role. And that's where you work closely with HR, because I think then otherwise you do get the scenario where the communications person becomes HR person and marketer and social media and spokesperson and. So it needs to be very, very clear what is expected of that specific role. And that will also then guide who else should join the team to take that, to help do the work. So that's just wanting to add that.
Yeah. Sorry, someone is asking, I think it's Julie again, is asking, how would you ensure 100% employee engagement especially for teams that are not on-site. I think we hinted on this, but you could probably give it
Yes,
some ice cream.
yeah, we're just talking about the idea that, when it comes to teams offsites, there are still policies and programs that guide employee communications. And so those are still non-negotiable. What we can rather do is that management will have to now take proactive measures to tweak themselves to meet those particular needs. So if it's now going to be a Zoom call, it's going to be a Zoom call. If it's not going to be visiting them personally, to be a visit person, unlike the 9 to 5 hour where we are all in the office space, you can see me. So you just need to tweak it a bit and then, adjust to the various options. But earlier on, Regina talked about engagement, and just to rehash it a bit in 3 different points. The idea is that management must always communicate earlier and frequently the issues available. One of the things that happens is that there's always that communication gap, and it's very embarrassing as an employee to hear or to read something affecting your organization when it's outside. I mean, you hear it on TV, radio, you're like, but I'm in this organization, I'm now hearing it. So we need to always have the culture of communicating earlier and frequently. Then she talked about letting them, be part of the process. Every time we engage, whether it's change management, whether it's an idea for a logo, even for a logo competition, let it be among the employees. It's not always we need to get a consultant to come and then somebody has a certain color they want to use, and you're like, wow, I never knew there was this color. And you're so excited. It will save you so much cost. So let employees continually be involved in all the processes that the organization undertakes. And then she talked about the idea that demonstrate trust in them by balancing both the good news and the bad news. At the end of the day, they are with you. They know what is going on. They've heard the office rumors and the gossips already. So telling them is not as if it's something new to them. But we need to just make sure that they are always in the loop, and the feedback loop. They should be the priority before anybody else. So just to hash on that one in terms of the employee engagement.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I think she's asking, what are your thoughts on implementing an SMS system for internal communication channels? I think it's a great idea to have a number of communication channels to use or platforms. Just like Asari says, depending on your framework or your policy, you must make sure that these are controlled as well on how they're used by internal employees. So once those policies are clear, then you can deploy them and make sure everyone knows how best they can use them and which communication goes on which platform. Regine, you had something, but as you come in, Austin has a question for you. And he's asking, how do we protect whistleblowers and retain confidentiality in internal communications to ensure organizational growth?
I saw that question. I was actually hoping Asari would answer that one.
Back to you.
I wanted to just quickly touch on the SMS system, just very, very quickly on that one. It is a good idea. I think the main thing is to actually ask your employees if it would work for them. So, for example, if we were to, it depends again, I suppose, which country, which industry, which where you're based. SMSs wouldn't work in South Africa, for argument's sake. Most people are on WhatsApp, and there's WhatsApp groups for everything. There's way too many WhatsApp groups these days. But it's again asking your employees what would be best for them, what would work for them. We worked with the company a number of years back that had 23 different channels of communication. Every single department had their own website, intranet, their own newsletter. It was chaos. So it's also to see what makes sense to have for which employees. And also then we have to start looking at literacy levels. We have to look at what and when and how often to send out those newsletters. But regarding whistleblowing, I don't know that I'm positioned to be able to answer. I think it's an excellent question. I love the question. And I'm just as keen to hear the answer, to be quite honest. I can just speak from what we have with some of our clients. What we've done is we've actually created a specific email, Ethics at Reputation Matters, where it's quite rudimentary. I mean, it's really, I think there's very sophisticated systems out there. But what we've done for now is we've allowed, because they also work across different areas, where they can email if they pick up something that's unethical, if there's a whistleblowing thing, which comes through to us to help them with confidentiality. We then pick up the issue, and then we see how best do we address that. Where do we need to take that information, with obviously keeping that person's information very confidential, because but again, I think that's a very, very good thing to have a conversation of. What are other companies doing? I mean, we see that people can phone toll-free lines. There's different channels of communication. I know too little about it. I don't think that I'm giving the best advice on that at the moment. So I'd rather just take a step back and be transparent and authentic about my answer there.
Yeah, I think with that one, like she said, the legal department always has some policy guidelines on it. So
the whistleblower policy, yes.
Yes, please. We refer to legal, and legal will give us the advice appropriately.
So every institution, I think, has that kind of policy to see how they manage whistleblowing, and make sure that you maintain confidentiality of information that is coming to you as an institution.
Exactly.
Okay, so before we ask this, I don't know, Regine, is Anthony, are you ready to share the results? Please.
I think it's that I was told it is ready. We're just gonna literally fly through it just so that everyone sees what everybody answered. So Tony, I don't know if you've got it on your side.
Okay, so you can go ahead maybe and take us through, Regine. I don't think the gentleman is ready with the results.
No problem, no problem. So we asked, does your organization have a... So first of all, thank you. Thank you so much for everybody for participating. I appreciate it. I think there's two sides to it. Either we have too many surveys out there and everybody's always... Oh, there we go. Now I see there's I don't know how you can... How would you... I see the presentation and the node group consult there at the top, but that's tiny. If anybody else can see that. So the blue is showing that the question that we asked was, does your organization have a dedicated office for internal communication? And the majority did say no. Then who is responsible for internal communication in your organization? And here we saw that most people said it is the communications department as well as the CEO. To a smaller amount, there is also a dedicated internal communication team. We asked, how often do you conduct communication research for your organization? And most of the people, and that's on this tiny little white at blue, most answered they haven't done, they don't conduct communication research for the organization. And I think that's a massive opportunity to have a look, to engage with your stakeholders, because I do see one of the questions here is, how do you measure the level of stakeholder engagement? Is to ask the question, is to have different questions. Have you ever conducted internal communication surveys? And again, here the answer was very much no. And I think, again, as we are moving into a space where it is data-driven, it's the data that also needs to tell the story. It helps us to know what story to tell. Where are those gaps? That also is then a very powerful tool for communicators to use to know where is it that we need to close the gap. We then said, what internal channels of communication do you have in place and receive? And I know there was a slight hiccup with that question, but mainly email, mainly in WhatsApp is being used there. And the reason I was interested to ask the next question, what internal channels of communication do you have currently in place? And again, WhatsApp came up mainly there, was the fact that we see way too many channels of communication being used. So as soon as there's a new social media platform, everyone jumps without really thinking about it. And then when you realize, shucks, you haven't updated it since October 2018, it's a waste of time. So it's and it just puts unnecessary pressure on the communications team that's already quite thin. So rather stick to one or two and do them really well. Get the messages through that. And then that was quite interesting, the open-ended. I was trying to do a word cloud, which was very unsuccessful. But I think the key things that came through was that, and this is actually very good, and this could be a very good next discussion, is what happens when the CEO doesn't listen. So as much as you know what needs to be done, what if the leadership that isn't open for feedback? No support or clear protocols, access to resources, hiring one person to do comms, PR, and marketing, lack of proper structures, and then limited funds. So, I mean, those are all very much, I think, everybody's challenges to face with. And I think we need more. We can discuss each one of them in a lot more detail. But I think, again, it's just to show just a few questions that you can then also ask your stakeholders internally. And I would also suggest, so from a research point of view, or communications point of view, is to ask your internal stakeholders, what channels would they prefer to get information on? What are the key messages they want information on, and how often? Those three. You'll also get really good feedback if you ask your employees, what are we doing really well? And what's the one thing we need to change or do differently? With those two questions, you can pick up massive gaps and massive opportunities when it comes to the communication strategies and plans. So that's just what I wanted to end off with. And that was a really tiny graph. I don't know whether it was on the screen or not. But over and back to you, Ian. Ian, back to you. Otherwise, sorry, over to you.
Oh, I mean, like you rightly said, as part of our preparations towards today's discussion, we had agreed to have this icebreaker actually. But I'm happy it even occurred at the end. That even gave us more insight, because based on the discussion, a number of you have also, given us new perspectives that we can use moving forward. I'm excited actually because she had given the example of the channels where she consulted for a company and some 32 channels, for that organization alone. And you're like, 32 channels, what on earth, and how on earth are you going to get information using 32 channels? So we need to work on the channels, 2, 3, depending on the needs, what exactly you want. The strategy is always important. So we don't get up any new channel, then we've created a personal account for it. There's this personal model where it talks about paid and shared and then owned media. And most of the time, they encourage that we move towards the owned media, where you own your own media. So if it's your website, for instance, you work on your website, and that website becomes a source of information for all your internal publics. You write something small and you say, for the rest of the information, follow the link. So we need to move to the own. When we pay for media, it's going to cost us a lot. We are not going to earn media all the time, because it's always something depending on what is newsworthy or not newsworthy, and they will determine the editorial output. And for shared, sometimes you can share and then to be so viral, it won't even make the impact you want. But when you have your own media, you control your content, you control the cost and all those things. So let's work on the channels and really determine the channels that we need that can help the internal publics as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Asari. We're running out of time. We have only 2 minutes to the end of the webinar. Maybe I'll give you a chance, Regine, to give us your parting shots so that we close this in time. Thank you very much for your time, but give us your parting shots as we close this.
Thank you so much. Time flies when you're having fun, so I really appreciate it. And I think my parting thoughts, or if you leave here today from my side, is have your values that you communicate, and just have that part of your DNA, and live by your values. That's the key thing from it, and take it from there. So that's my thing. Over to you. Back to you, Ian.
Thank you, Regine. Regine, ladies and gentlemen, salute, Regine. Thank you very much. Corporate reputation specialist from South Africa. Thank you for allowing us tap into your wisdom. And of course, Regine has been in this field for over 19 years. She has over 19 years, I think, isn't it? If I'm
Yeah,
not mistaken. Yeah, over
that's
19 years.
correct. Yeah.
Yeah, she's been dealing with the reputation matters in Africa. She founded a company in 2005, and she holds a degree in mass communications management, a master's from Pretoria University, but also has developed a number of strategies in change, marketing, communications, name it. So I salute you. Regine, we had a lot to learn from you. Thank you very much for creating time to be on this class, and we continue to have these conversations. Of course, see you in Mombasa,
Mombasa.
in June. Yes. Asari, over to you. Your parting shots as we end this.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you, PR Funding Masterclass. Employees are a key public in any organization. Well-informed employees are the organization's best goodwill ambassadors. They must be treated as part of the organization. They should not be taken for granted. Consistent and steady communication should always be the key to engage them. Thank you, Ian. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Professor. Professor here is a lecturer in Strategic Communications Department at the University of Winneba in Ghana, and also Professor is an accredited member of the Institute of PR in Ghana. He's an ambassador. He served as a deputy honorary secretary, the Institute from 2000 to 2004. He's a lecturer in the Department of Strategic Communications at the University of Winneba in Ghana. Thank you very much, Professor. Professor.
Thank you.
My brother Osari, I think it will be good to see you in Mombasa.
I will be there, please. I'll be there.
As we celebrate
yes, the 50th years
of APRA. I don't know, is Veronica online? Veronica, you need to give us some closing remarks and details of that conference, because we all want to be in Mombasa. But I think, thank you very much, members. Thank you, participants, for coming in this third class of this year. Next class will be last Thursday of April. So every last Thursday of the month, we have a class powered by APRA and the panelists that are selected across the continent. And of course, we've so much learning that we continue to dissect this. We'll be sharing more notes on your emails if you registered for this class. I want to thank the PR Fundi coordination team, Rita, Anthony, Ivan, behind this class at Node Group Consult, a PR and marketing agency where I lead. But also, I think there's a lot to learn. We continue to learn on strategic internal communications. What I've learned, what I've picked from this class is that this is not about sending messages to employees. It's about fostering an engaged workforce and make sure it is informed, empowered to be the rightful ambassadors out there. And also I learned that internal comms can shape external comms. So it's very important that you drive organizational success from the internal to the external. Thank you very much. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much. See you.
Cheers.
Cheers to you too.